The Israel Defense Forces currently preparing for a ground assault on the Gaza Strip. How is this urban warfare phase of this battle likely to go? How long could it take for the IDF to be able to take over the Gaza Strip? What kind of military pushback should they expect from the Hamas, which has been pulverized over the last 10 days from the air by the Israel Air Force? Joining us, four very sharp military strategists. I want to welcome first Colonel Liam Collins, founding director at the Modern War Institute, the United States Military West Point Academy. We've got Yaakov Lapin, a well-known military strategic affairs analyst and expert. Professor Ephraim Inbar is president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And for an Indian military perspective, we're joined on this broadcast by Lieutenant General KJS Tiny Dillon. Welcome to all our guests. I want to start by asking Colonel Liam Collins at the Modern War Institute about this third ground assault on the Gaza Strip, and how long do you think this is likely to go on for? The IDF very clearly getting set for this ground assault. How much of a resistance do you think the Hamas will be able to put up, given the fact that they've been badly pulverized from the air over the past 11 days?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas will still be able to put up significant resistance, right? If you just go back to some of Israel's, earlier conflicts, these, insurgent terrorist fighters, they may not have the mass numbers of a conventional force, but they can put up resistance, right? Moving in tunnels from one location to another, seemingly popping in and out of, different stories of different buildings from underground tunnels. So they can put up, some stiff resistance. As far as how long it'll go on, I think it will only go on for a few weeks, maybe a couple months, and not because that means that Israel will be successful about destroying Hamas, which you're not capable of. But I think it has more to do with, the way Israel's defense is established, they activate hundreds of thousands of reservists. They can't keep them mobilized for too long because they have to go back to work and keep the economy going. So I think it's more of, once they get to a satisfactory solution, they've eliminated enough of Hamas's capability, enough of their fighters, they'll do it. But in terms of, if they want to, control that city and own it, I mean, look, it took the Russians throwing everything they got at Bakhmut, and it took them 10 months to get that. So I think it'll be more of a limited objective to really degrade Hamas, not destroy Hamas. And then that'll take, I think less than 2 months.
You're saying that this military operation could take up to about 2 months. One of the big challenges that the Israel Defense Forces will face is the underground network of tunnels that the Hamas has built. Now, Yaakov Lapin, we know that the Israel Air Force has been targeting these underground tunnels and that several of them have been destroyed. What's your best sense at this moment of the kind of capacity the Hamas has, given what's happened in the past 11 days, to push back? Was the Hamas, in your view, already preparing and planning because they knew that after the kind of attack they staged, the IDF will come in? Has that already been thought through, or do you think they're a very battered and bruised force at this moment?
I think that they are battered, and they absolutely knew that the IDF would launch a ground offensive. They clearly factored that into this attack. Actually, since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007 through a violent coup, it began building its terrorist army, this Iranian-sponsored terrorist army, and that includes thousands of kilometers collectively under Gaza combat tunnels to move fighters and weapons around. And they've also, set up these command and attack posts in multi-story buildings so that they can have a good command of the combat area when they expect the Israeli forces to come in. They've spent years building this terrorist army, embedding it into the civilian population center, and therefore when the Israeli ground forces have to move in, they will be facing threats from 360 degrees, from above, from those tall buildings, as well as from drones, from the surface level, and from underneath, from the tunnels. And that is what the IDF has been training for years. So those are the kinds of challenges they're going to have to deal with.
So what part of the Hamas's military capacity, according to you, Yaakov Lapin, have been degraded because of the aerial attacks? And how much of a military structure do they still have to be able to take on the IDF when it does come in?
I think, that we can roughly say, without seeing the actual intelligence, what we can roughly say is that Hamas has been battered, but it's been very far from being destroyed, because in order to reach those core, what they call in the military, the centers of gravity of this terror army, the command levels, the command posts, the attack posts, the ability to produce weapons, the ability to fire weapons, and the thousands of terrorists that make up the military wing, that can only be done through a ground offensive, really going from street to street, bunker to bunker, neighborhood to neighborhood. So they're battered, but they will only be demolished as a fighting terrorist force by forces on the ground, by boots on the ground.
General Dillon, we saw during the Russia-Ukraine war questions being asked about the future of armored warfare, tank warfare, especially now with drones, the ability to be able to penetrate a tank from the top with a precision fire. The Hamas showed incredible military sophistication in the attack that it mounted on the 7th of October. But we also know that the Israelis have been looking at what happened in that Russia-Ukraine war and learning those lessons. From what you understand, how do you see this phase of urban warfare progress once it starts?
Good evening, Rahul. At the outset, I must put a caution that no two battlefronts, no two battlegrounds, no two battles are the same.
Sure.
We are just talking about Russia-Ukraine vis-a-vis Hamas, Israel or IDF. We must understand Gaza Strip is only 365 square kilometers of the real estate. North-south, it's about 40-42 kilometers. East-west, it is from 8 kilometers to 12 kilometers max. Tank warfare needs maneuver space. It needs elbow space. Wherever, say, it's about 8 to 10 kilometers of width of Gaza Strip, only about 500 meters to 1 kilometer towards the Mediterranean Sea, and similar distance towards the buffer zone on the east is what is clear area where the tank columns can move freely. In between, 6 to 8 kilometers is very thickly populated, densely populated, built-up area, multi-story concrete, as the co-panelists were saying, the tunnels underneath. So this is going to be a very, very sluggish battle, and it has its own complications. I said maneuver space, so armor columns cannot be used in conventional tactical assault formations, where you line up with intercept distance of 50 meters to 300 meters, depending on the visibility and the type of threat from the enemy, and you go tally-ho. It's going to be house by house, lane by lane, block by block clearing. And what are the problems of built-up area of such density, where multi-story buildings with windows, doors opening onto the streets, lanes and the by-lanes? A well-sighted sniper can stop a platoon for 3 to 5 hours by shifting room to room, shifting window to window, carrying his ammunition boxes, carrying his belt boxes. And the columns who are in the lane or on the street, they are vulnerable for attack from the ground level or fire from the 7th floor of a building, which they may not be able to see. So, and then the tunnels inside, underneath, they will be heavily booby-trapped. Once the Hamas vacates those tunnels and moves out, melting in the civilian population, they will leave them highly booby-trapped. So any entry into that would be very risky, and I don't think the Israeli forces would physically enter those tunnels. They will have the deep search detection systems. They would have activated their human intelligence assets, who would tell them the exact location of the tunnels, the explosives, the ammunition which are dumped there, and then they will destroy them by top attack ammunition, by either from air or from drone, or by direct firing of weapons, who would have been able to reach them.
Professor Ifram Inbaz,
classical armor assault,
given the fact that
that
on the 7th of October, the Hamas mounted the kind of attack that it did, has led many to wonder whether they've actually prepared for the next round. Because when you go in and attack Israel in the way that you do, in the way that they did, they know that there will be a very massive pushback. Do you think they've thought this through in terms of their strategy for this phase of war as well, and are prepared for what Israel is bringing? Or is it that now, because they pulled off that attack, people are over-assuming what the Hamas is actually capable of? Because it's not a proper military force. They were just a group of terrorists to stage a spectacular account, but can't possibly have war gamed this all the way through.
The Hamas strategy is quite clear.
Exactly.
They provoke Israel to attack. There are not too many routes to attack. And they don't mind having many losses. They'll retreat, hoping that the international community will intervene, particularly after pictures of coming out of Gaza, and will stop Israelis to continue their mission, hoping that they will be able to exact many casualties in order to change the mood in Israel. This is a strategy, and it remains to be seen if they will be successful. Anything less than dismantling the military capabilities of Hamas will be considered in Israel as a failure. And maybe they think that they have a chance to prevent this type of outcome.
What is Hamas's endgame according to you, given the fact that they attacked the way that they did on the 7th of October? From your experience at the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security, what do you think the Hamas is expecting to do? Because you're looking at this battle from Israel's perspective. Let's just spin that on a moment. In this phase, when the IDF comes in, what's the Hamas expecting? Because in none of these scenarios does the Hamas actually win. They can delay, stall, make the Israel defense forces take losses, but there's no way that that the Hamas actually wins.
Allow me to disagree. I think that they have already scored a great success in eroding seriously the Israeli deterrence. And this is exactly why Israel is so determined to finish Hamas. They were successful. They hope to cause many more casualties to Israel, which will add to their success. And this is their endgame. And don't forget, this is an organization that believes that God is on their side, and you don't have a really more powerful actor in the world than God. And so they are waiting for an Israeli attack to fail.
Colonel Collins, do you buy that theory that from Israel's perspective, Professor Inbar saying Hamas's perspective is that they've already won, and as Israel comes in, as their casualties mount, that's even more victory looked at from Hamas's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas is right. I mean, they're playing a long game on this, and they knew there was going to be retaliation. They expected Israel to come in, and it was meant to provoke it. So in their mind, that's a win, just as right Al-Qaeda in Iraq when the American forces went into Fallujah the first time and then stopped that operation because they were worried about collateral damage. Then Zarqawi viewed that as a win for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So I think that's historically, if you look, they will view these kind of operations. They went in, killed a lot of Israelis. The Israelis will come in there and do some significant destruction. But in their mind, that was a tactical, maybe even operational, strategic victory for them.
Okay, I want to just step out for a moment and look at whether this is likely to escalate into a two-front conflict. And if it does, then can Israel take on both the Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the Hezbollah in the West Bank and in Lebanon? So let me put that question to Colonel Collins first. Looked at from the outside, of course, we know that the Israeli Defense Forces are the most competent army in the Gulf Arab area, but we also know that Iran has been training the Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah is now better armed than it has already been, and we've already seen the Hamas's capabilities. How is it likely to turn into two-front war, and if it does, how is that likely to go militarily?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question we're waiting on. If you look historically, the evidence would tell you there's a good probability that it will happen and be a two-front war, right? If Lebanese Hezbollah want to bog Israel down and keep them from committing all of their energy into Gaza, then that's entirely plausible. And again, looking historically, it's more likely than not that will happen, but it doesn't mean that it will happen.
Yaakov Lapin, your sense of whether it is probable or inevitable that this is likely to turn into a two-front war, and if the Hezbollah does get involved, how do you see that Iran versus Hamas and Hezbollah simultaneously that war play out?
Well, let's look at what's already happened. The Lebanese arena is already involved. For the past 5 days, there hasn't been a day that's gone by without anti-tank fire attacks from Hezbollah, attempts to cross the border by terror cells. We've had casualties in Israel, and Hezbollah has sustained casualties in Israeli return fire. So it's already involved. Relatively speaking, it's at a low level, and this is very deliberate. We had the Iranian foreign minister very recently in Lebanon coordinating. Lebanon is actually, really held hostage by Hezbollah, which is an Iranian terrorist army, just like Hamas, but far, far bigger. And what we're seeing is Iran synchronizing its entire regional access and getting ready for the next phases of this war. And the instructions that the Iranians appear to have given to their proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, is harass Israel, keep it focused on the north so that it can't focus on the south fully like it wants to, but also it's willing to take the risk of that deteriorating into a full war. I don't think Hezbollah is deterred by that at all. It's willing to take that risk and to fulfill Iranian orders.
No, so let's look at it militarily. If we were to war game this, now the Hezbollah has been attacking and the Israelis counter-attacking in southern Lebanon and in the West Bank in a limited basis. Do you see this escalate into an all-out war? And if the Israeli army is fighting the Hezbollah and the Hamas simultaneously, how is that war likely to go? And why I ask this question is because in the past, when Israel has gone to war with Arab countries, very often the effort, for example, in the 1973 war also was to ensure that civilians weren't impacted in quite the way that the Hamas did. They just came in and killed whoever they came. It wasn't a combatant versus combatant war, it was a combatant versus non-combatant war as well. So how do you see that going, Yaakov Lapid?
Well, in many ways, what Hamas did on the 7th of October, this mass murder invasion of border communities, is exactly what Hezbollah had been planning to do for northern communities right near the border for many years. They even boasted of these plans invading the Galilee region, which is the Israeli region next to Lebanon. So Hamas did it first, and that means that Hezbollah has lost an element of surprise. So it may still, if it decides to enter this war fully, then it may still try to invade northern Israel with its terror death squads, just as Hamas did. But it would run into a far more ready Israeli military, heavily deployed along the northern border. I would expect the Israeli Air Force to lead the Israeli response in the northern arena for the first stage. If that actually escalates, I would expect it to unleash levels of firepower that we have not seen, not in this conflict, and I don't think in this region. And I think that warning has been sent to Hezbollah and to Iran very, very clearly. We've also got 2 U.S. Strike carrier groups, one in the Mediterranean, one making its way into the Mediterranean. That's an American deterrent signal to Hezbollah and to Iran, which has yet to be tested. So we're seeing certainly, all of the actors in this conflict and potential actors getting their positions ready for a broadening of this conflict. And above all of this is an Iranian threat saying that if Israel moves into Gaza, which it surely will, they will activate additional fronts. The extent of that activation remains to be.
Do you buy that? Is that an empty threat, or do you think the Iranians will walk the talk?
Well, they're already doing it. Okay, this is the thing we have to, I think, get our heads around. They are already attacking Israel from Lebanon, and we've had Israeli casualties. And if
but those are limited. Those are limited battles at this moment. My question is it possible that the state of Iran gets involved against the state of Israel as an open, all-out attack?
The Iranians prefer to do their wars via proxy. This is exactly why they funded and built Hezbollah on Israel's northern border and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The proxy warfare is the preferred manner of attack that Iran has been building. I mean, they will prefer to keep it that way, but they are making threats. And I think that it has probably been told to them that they are not immune, and that if this war escalates, targets in Iran themselves could be exposed to firepower strikes. So we will simply have to wait and see.
Professor Inbar, we know that President Biden has deputed 2 aircraft carrier groups in the waters around Israel and Palestine. Now, there are questions about whether the Americans will get involved militarily. Is this just signaling and posturing? are the Americans actually likely to deploy their troops and their weapon systems? And the question of whether Israel will want America to get involved militarily. To have their backing is one thing, to actually want for American troops on the ground. What's your reading on that?
Obviously, Israel doesn't want American troops to fight for it. This has been the Israeli line from its very inception, and this is why it is popular in the United States. It is basically the Churchillian line: give us the means and we'll do the job. I'm not sure that the American presence in the Eastern Mediterranean nowadays will have a deterring effect on Iran. We shouldn't forget that Iran, at this time, is attacking vessels, Navy vessels of the United States in the Indian Ocean. And they are trying to attack Americans in Iraq, in other places. So I must say that the calculation, the strategic calculation of Iran is not entirely clear to me. It depends. If they think that this is an opportunity to conclude successfully their population-centric strategy with a multi-front war, one of the goals of Hamas obviously was to ignite a multi-front war, which is not only Hezbollah in the north, but also attacks from Syria, which happened already, as well as some kind of guerrilla warfare or terrorist attacks from the West Bank, and even to include riots or other disrupting activities on part of the Israeli Arabs. If in Tehran they believe, if their perception is that this is a ripe moment for doing it, I believe they will activate Hezbollah to the best of their capabilities. If they don't see this an opportunity, they may not want to spare Hezbollah, which is basically their most effective deterrent against Israel at this stage. It remains to be seen.
What's your reading of the strategic calculation in Iran? Will they want to activate the Hezbollah in an all-out offense against the Israelis like the Hamas went all out, or do you think they want to hold this asset back for some other time?
I think they would like to do it. I'm not sure their evaluation is that this is the right moment. This is exactly the dilemma in Iran.
Colonel Collins, 2 American aircraft strike groups in the waters around Israel. Are they there just as a deterrent posture, or will President Biden send his planes and his men and women in if Israel were to face a multi-pronged attack?
Yeah, I mean, this is purely a deterrent measure. As the other speakers have said, Iran is not going to get directly involved, right? They work through the proxies. That works for them better politically and strategically. And Israel doesn't need or want U.S. assistance, right? They're one of the most powerful militaries in the world. For them, it would show weakness if they need, right, any kind of air support or something like that. So at least for the current fight in Gaza, or if it goes into Lebanon, they're capable of doing that themselves. They don't want the assistance. It's really just a deterrent from Iran, I guess, getting involved directly. I mean, it's already, pretty, involvement through support to Hamas or Hezbollah, but it's really a deterrent from more involvement.
General Dillon, looked at from your lens, share your assessment of whether you see this conflict escalate first to the Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, then becoming bigger. We're already seeing Vladimir Putin go meet Xi Jinping. We're already seeing the fact that Iran is acting in close concert with anti-America countries. Do you see this becoming a much bigger nightmare? Do you think it will remain localized and regional?
When Hamas came into Israeli territory on 7th of October, and now we are almost 11, 12 days into past that incident, if it was such a coordinated thing, it would have started showing signs by now. Since no signs of this coordination or synergy between all the forces or all the countries which you named have emerged so far, so it's safe to assume, and as a military commander I will never speculate, I will always go by the military battle indications. As of now, the battle indications are that those countries are not going to get involved directly at a larger scale. However, smaller scale skirmishes just to prove a point and show their solidarity that tomorrow so nobody will tell them you didn't come in. So that type of actions will happen. And similarly, coming to the point of US direct involvement, United States boots on ground or aircrafts in the sky are not going to happen because Israel does not really need it. What Israel will need and what United States or other allies can provide is the intelligence, good quality intelligence, real-time intelligence, give out the target objectives which are getting activated, and Israel has the wherewithal from within their own means to neutralize those objectives. So intelligence sharing will happen, it has always been happening, but it will happen at more real-time and at a larger scale. As regards the other countries getting involved, I don't see the possibility at a large scale in the near future.
Okay, so we've heard from 4 military minds on the next course of action. The Israeli offensive in Gaza, the impact this could have on Hezbollah, the impact this could have on Syria and Iran, and the prospects of this turning into a larger battle than it is at this moment. We've heard different perspectives. I want to thank our guests, Liam Collins, Yaakov Lapin, Professor Ifram Inbar, and General Dhillon for joining me on the news track. The biggest question is what happens next in this war and how is that Israeli offensive likely to go? And you've just heard some perspectives from some very sharp military minds.